It is now my honor and privilege to introduce our first keynote speaker. Dr. Richard Tarnas is a professor emeritus at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where he was founding director of the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness Department. He's the author of The Passion of the Western Mind and Cosmos of Psyche. He's frequently lectured on archetypal studies and depth psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute and was formerly the Director of Programs and Education at Esalen Institute. The President of the International Transpersonal Association and a member of the Board of Governors of the C.G. Jung Institute in San Francisco. His keynote address is titled Jung and Our Moment in Time. Please welcome Richard Tarnas.
Thank you, Talga, and Lee, and the many organizers who put this together. I know a bit about what it's like to put on conferences. It's a very complex and arduous process, and it's a service. It's very kind of people who do this kind of thing, and I really applaud you for all that's gone into creating this for us. And it's an honor to be with you here today, and also those on TV land here in Namaste Hall and out in the greater world. As we celebrate the 150th year since C.G. Jung's birthday. In 1875, he was born July 26, 1875, right with the last rays of the setting sun, very appropriately, very symbolically. A lot of symbolic meanings pouring out of those last rays of the sun, because Jung was really a key figure in recognizing what we might, as depth psychologists, as poets, be able to recognize as the great solar descent that's taking place in our moment of history. That transformational threshold, that's part of every one of our personal journeys, but it's also the personal journeys of individuation and initiation, but also now it's on a collective scale and with tremendous evolutionary implications. Now, to understand our moment in history, Jung brought very special qualities. He was not only a profound psychologist, he was also a seer. His intuitive capacities were extraordinary, and his insights often had an authentic prophetic character. Now, to understand our moment in history, we have to always keep in mind that the present moment, the present, our present condition, our present identity, we always need to recognize that the present is deep. It's not like a mere point on a flat horizontal continuum. The present contains all of the past layered deeply within it, but more than that, we all contain that past. Each of us contains our entire history, both our personal history, but our familial history, cultural history, our collective history, even universal. It's all in us. That history encompasses the part and the whole, the near and the distant. We're not blank slates at birth or any other time. Everything is layered within us, all of our past, and it's all dynamically interacting and evolving within our depths. And to live unconsciously is to basically just live at that level of the flat horizontal continuum. But to live with some degree of awareness, of consciousness, it requires a constant overcoming of that myopic vision and an entering into our depths, which takes courage, which takes a capacity to question ourselves, as Jung did so much for himself, thank God. It's a process of continual engagement, fusion of horizons, as it were, between our consciousness and what we can call the unconscious. It's not so much the unconscious as what is unconscious at any moment to a particular form of consciousness. And this recognition about the depth of the present, the depth of each of us, the depth of psyche, that's Jung's great focus. And it arose from his central psychological vision, and that recognition also gave rise to his practice. You could also say his practice gave rise to that vision, to the recognition. It's a kind of constant hermeneutic feedback loop. But Jung's practice was to dive into those depths, those multi-layered and dynamic depths, and seek to retrieve them, to differentiate and articulate them, recognize their, bring them into his symbolic awareness, because the unconscious speaks symbolically constantly, and thereby to bring the conscious and the great unconscious into a fruitful dialogue. One could say also that in a kind of different, more philosophical way, Alfred North Whitehead did this. This recognition of the depths within us, of how everything is feeding into the present moment, everything's feeding into each of us and our consciousness and our choices and so forth, as well as that magic moment of creativity and our own agency, which Jung also carried that recognition of the vast number of factors that are coming into us and shaping our moment and our choices, and yet that Promethean spark that requires our responsible agency. Whitehead this past century, Hegel, Schelling did it a century earlier. So too Goethe and Darwin did it in their different ways in a biological context. Of course, Nietzsche, huge. And in our lifetimes, a host of feminist scholars like Catherine Keller have brought these deep dive insights into the past, into what's shaping us in our psychic depths, affecting our very sense of identity, reality. Most recently, two of our eldest and most multidisciplinary scholars, Charles Taylor, Robert Bellah, they've done so in epic fashion in the history of religion and society, in moral philosophy, and in philosophical anthropology. I highly commend to your, if you don't mind, in this age, reading large books. You only have two out there, but you can, when you're a professor, you don't get a lot done unless you're Matt Siegel. But I have, my two are pretty large, but Robert Bellah's Religion and Human Evolution, an irreplaceable work from the Paleolithic to the Axial Age, and then Charles Taylor's A Secular Age, just required reading, let's say, and very fruitfully interplays with Jung's great insights. But Jung is crucial, partly because our age is a psychological age par excellence. Also because of the power and intensity of Jung's encounter with the depths of psyche. And Jung remains crucial. And to answer the question mark in the subtitle of our conference, he remains crucial and relevant because he not only underwent that encounter, but in the many, many years that unfolded from, the 1913, 1918 period, the Red Book, Great Descent, the flooding of images, the unconscious, where he's barely holding on to his sanity and yet also seeing and recognizing deeper realities. And for the many decades that he was, and we were all graced with, that came to him after that period, he was able to translate what he experienced, that encounter, into an articulate vision of the psyche and of human life. He was able to theorize that vision and then offer viable practices for others to pursue the same quest. And so this morning, I'd like to continue that quest, that long journey of exploration and understanding, as especially with respect to history. The depth psychology that Jung shaped and bestowed to the 20th century can be said to contain three levels of significance with respect to history. The first, depth psychology grew out of our history. It was made possible by our history. A lot of philosophical and imaginative and scientific and psychological imaginative advances had to happen for depth psychology to be even conceived or possible in the later 19th century and early 20th century. It was a flowering of that history, but the reverse is also true, and that is, or the converse, it was necessitated by that history. Depth psychology was what we would call a compensation. It was an enormous compensatory act of the deep psyche to the one-sidedness of the powerful rational executive agency and egoic consciousness that the modern self was in danger of becoming, and still is in danger of becoming, nothing more than a utilitarian payoff calculator. Increasingly dissociated from its own depths. And when something's deeply dissociated with its own depths, troubles begin. That's Jung's way of saying that. He put it so frequently in different ways, but the basic point is, before the bar of nature and fate, unconsciousness is no excuse. So in both these ways, depth psychology was an outcome of the historical process and context that brought it forth. It was simultaneously a capacity that was made possible by the preceding evolution, but it was also a necessary compensation to that evolution. So that's one level of significance that depth psychology holds with respect to history. A second one, depth psychology also provides us with a powerful lens, a multifaceted lens with which to better understand that history. It gives us insights that are not otherwise available into the deeper dimensions of historical development. So much of history is focused on the external, the big strongmen and dictators and military conquests and things that are visible on the outside. But what was happening on the inside, the interior history of a civilization, is so important. And depth psychology provides very special insights into those deeper interior realities that shape history. It's a lens and a frame of reference through which we can explore what we might call deep history, to see that history not only from within its interior, but also from below. And perhaps also offer a fresh perspective as if from above, like, in a sense, simultaneously from the depths of psyche and the depths of the earth, but also from a differentiated, elevated perspective, as if from above, like the heliocentric view as well as the geocentric view. We need them both. That's depth psychology's great gift. It constantly is giving us this sort of stereoscopic binocular vision that is crucial for insight. And finally, in terms of depth psychology's relationship with respect to history, it's become a player in that history. Having entered into the arena of modern culture, it has a voice at the table. It provides insights then that ripple out into the larger self-reflections of our society. It is, as Edward Edinger put it, a new dispensation. It has efficacy. And with that efficacy, that societal efficacy, that the subtle ways in which what we talk about, what we think about, what we share with our friends, what our inner contemplations are, these ripple out into the larger atmosphere, the cultural discourse, the gestalt of the whole. And that's a responsibility to be playing our role with that. I think that responsibility is one reason why all of us are here today, that sense of it. And it brings us here for this conference. Now, I remember the late Dean Alan Jones, the Dean of Grace Cathedral. 1987, the Jung Institute of San Francisco put on a remarkable conference called Jung's Challenge to Christianity. A lot of great speakers were there. Murray Stein, and I'm not going to go over the whole list, but there was Alan. And as he got up, one of his first words were, he said, "We live today in a post-Jungian world." By this, he meant that our world is not now just post-Freudian, as is often said, and post-Copernican, post-Darwinian, etc. But it's post-Jungian because so many fundamental insights that came from Jung, Jungian ideas, have entered into the sensibility of our time. I'm thinking of the recognition, the importance of like the collective psyche, of synchronicity, of archetypes, of an archetypal understanding, of integrating and rebalancing feminine and masculine within all of us and in our society, of the power of complexes, both personal and cultural, as we will hear elaborated over this weekend, of the different roles of feeling, thinking, intuiting, sensing, the recognition that of the deep unconscious as a source of wisdom, not just a trash bin of repressed instincts, and the unfolding of human life as a psychologically and spiritually meaningful journey from beginning to end, including the midlife. And each stage has its different challenges, but also each stage has its special nobility, and also its fundamentally different potentials and gifts. All of these ideas are now in common cultural conversation. They've entered in widely into our society's discourse and into its cultural vocabulary. So I want to just spend a few minutes, 1 minute on why I think depth psychology has been so fertile. It's such a fertile stream of development over the past century and a half. And I believe this is so because it it managed to emerge from and sustain a great synthesis of opposites in our culture. It was in itself a conjunctio oppositorum of two fundamental polarities. Now, I've discussed in this room probably 100 times, but in that recent public program I did in last winter for CIIS that you can watch for free, some of these basic polarities that I think are central to understanding the fertility of depth psychology. But I'll just mention these two big ones. It's the great integration, the great synthesis of the two fundamental streams that fed into modernity, the cultural stream of the Enlightenment and Romanticism. Depth psychology is the perfect marriage of those two. The Enlightenment mind, as it were, and the Romantic soul. And it was also, from its beginnings, an extraordinary collaboration of both women and men. From the very beginning, the patients and the psychiatrists, suffering souls, well, all of them, certainly Nietzsche and Freud, Jung, as well as the women and men that were coming into their clinics in Vienna and Zurich and Berlin. I won't go into that, but let me just gesture to these larger, this conjunctio oppositorum, by saying, with Nietzsche and Zarathustra, the world is deep, deeper than day can comprehend. Deeper than day is deeper than our usual everyday consciousness tends to understand or even perceive. The world is deeper than day can comprehend because it includes both day and night, light and dark, the day ruled by the sun, the night ruled by the moon, the night of dreams, of mystery, the unknown, the depths, the light and the shadow, the night sky that reveals the many lights, the many truths, that opens up our vision to deep space, not just the single, powerful, focused light and immediate reality of the day and the brilliant sun of modern consciousness that eclipses the large, complex whole and those vast, numinous depths. Depth psychology is the fruit of a great solar-lunar hieros gamos, a sacred marriage. And I think that's why it has proved to be such an immensely fruitful alchemical synthesis. And it gets its depth from the solar self's great descent into the depths of psyche. All right, what I'd like to do right now is to bring up just a very few images up here, if I can, because I now want to kind of turn the lens of depth psychology to illuminate history, but in particular, our dramatic and even fraught time. Let's see, can we take out that? Great. So, a lot of you guys know these images I'm about to show from previous like classes or lectures, but very briefly. On the right is our typical modern worldview, where the self is sharply distinct from the world, the inner from the outer, the realm of meaning and purpose and spirit and soul and consciousness and our moral aspirations. All that's located just within the bounds of the human self, that it's buffered. And then the world as a whole is void of all of those. And by contrast, if we go back to the primal worldview that continues to this day, you see a much more porous self. And instead of soul and spirit, conscious intelligence and agency being located just in the human, it pervades the whole world. The primal worldview that lives to this day, at some level in all of us, but carried forward especially by indigenous cultures and so forth. In the primal worldview, intelligence and soul and agency. They pervade the whole world. Everything is sentient. It's a communion of subjects. This is the anima mundi that saturates the entire world and is not located privately by Homo sapiens. I should say that, remember what I'm talking about here. They're what Weber would call ideal types. Each is I'm going to be showing a few others in a second, very quickly. Each is a representative, distinctive cultural gestalt, but they don't exist in a pure exclusive form in any given era or society or person. They're just very helpful, iconic symbolizations for understanding a lot of complexities. And they come in packages because this is also not just self and world, but you could also say that's on the right, the modern, that's also mind over body, very typical. It's the Cartesian subject-object split that we've all inherited to some extent, even though we strive to transcend that while also sustaining its gifts. Okay, let's move to the next image if we could. And by the way, I say Descartes, he's a handy person to talk with respect about that, with respect to that change. But that shift into the differentiated superior subject human versus the external world as unconscious and mechanistic, et cetera, disenchanted, that was emerging even in the later Middle Ages, and it was by the 17th century it was widespread, and Descartes was just an extraordinarily clear, articulate expositor of that view. So if we can use those words, participation mystique, and animism without any background disparagement. Every once in a while, Jung would talk about participation mystique and picking up some of the still lingering modernist or modern arrogance about ancient wisdom, indigenous cultures and primitive, which was the word that would be used much more back then. Jung had such appreciation and insight into, and yet he also was carrying certain blind spots. It was the same thing with, he made such advances with understanding masculine and feminine, and yet also blind spots. The patriarchal lingering structures were still pretty dominant in his time and filtered into a kind of essentialism that still crept into his language about this. And so it's always important to remember that every great breakthrough and person who represents a breakthrough, there's always mortgages to the past. That's Vogelin's term, Eric Vogelin. Mortgages to the past, whether we're talking about the great axial breakthroughs of the first millennium BCE, or whether we're talking about the Copernican revolution, or we're talking about our own personal breakthroughs. There's always mortgages to the past where certain things continue and limit the fullness of the opening of the revolution. And in many ways, those are necessary as like bridges to the transition to it couldn't have happened all at once. It has to happen like that. And that's why we have to be patient with people with their blind spots and their flaws. Everybody is on a long journey, and we're standing on giants, and we're flying that great vast distance, and other birds will fly farther. Our teachers have all come to a halt. That's Nietzsche. And thank God that will continue. But that's why we kind of have to, I think, be patient with, God, I can't believe how wrong he was on that, just throw out the book across the room. We have to kind of take these things in a much more charitable way for our own benefit. So this whole thing can be seen basically, therefore, this 5,000-year process is either an enormous liberating recognition of the human tendency towards naive, childlike projection, and thereby we gain a new sense of mature agency in the modern, instrumental power, metaphysical status, etc. Or this could be seen as the human appropriation of the entire cosmic anima mundi, an extraordinary act of human hubris, which has, as we all know from our Greek tragedies, not so great results. So you just think of today. So let me give an example. Almost every time that Joseph Campbell would give a lecture, or a weekend seminar or something like that, week-long seminar, he would typically do at Esalen. And one of the first things he would say is, it would not be too much to say that myth is the secret opening through which the cosmos pours its inexhaustible energies into human cultural manifestation. That's not a modern statement. That's coming straight from the primal depths. Myth is a secret opening through which the cosmos pours its inexhaustible energies into human cultural manifestation. Now, in the modern disenchanted worldview, it would not be too much to say that myth is the secret opening through which the human mind pours onto the cosmos its private human meanings, reflecting the naive human need to live in a meaningful universe. So that's kind of the polarity. So our modern autonomy has been purchased at a steep price of alienation. Now, Jung struggled mightily within this modern condition from the start of his career, inside that human self. He worked within it for so long by recognizing the depths within the psyche, even if it was a psyche contained within the human cranium. And I think his long, great loyalty to Kant reflected his attempt to split the difference. But as you know, Jung had a very long and creative life, and his ideas kept evolving. And that decade from his mid-70s through his early 80s, I mean, wow, just spectacular. Answer to Job, synchronicity, mysterium conjunctionis, ion, the undiscovered self, memories, dreams, reflections. This is later 70s and 80s. The hits just kept coming. But in particular, it was his decisive articulation of the phenomenon of synchronicities, the archetypes, psychoid nature. They weren't just in here. Synchronistic and archetypal phenomena filled the world, and we were participating in it. Not to mention his sense of the self archetype, ordering the individuation process from outside as well as inside. That's impossible from the modern disenchanted perspective. Jungians are always playing with that. They're both modern, and they're also, they live in an enchanted universe, but kind of have to be careful about how much they totally own up to it, lest the psychoanalysts go nuts about it. But in all these ways, he broke out of the modern and pointed the way forward. All right, let's go very fast to like figure 3. There's a crucial midpoint between these two. Can't go into these. This were a nice 3-hour seminar that we usually have in these rooms here would be great. But this is the great axial breakthrough, the first millennium BC, where there was basically discovery of the transcendent divine, whether it's in China, India, like Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, the Jewish prophets, like both Isaiah's, Ezekiel, the Greeks, from Pythagoras to Plato, all of them in different ways are recognizing an enduring transcendent reality. Taoism's special case, but all the others, there's a new dualism. There's a big reason for it, which we won't go into, but it just, among other things, it represented a breakthrough out of not being able to have a transcendent platform from which to assess the relative justice and goodness of the society and the social organization. Because before that, like in the great archaic civilizations, if you were the pharaoh, what you said was divinely authoritative, and no division of state and of religion and state. It was a fully synthesized. Now you've got sages and philosophers and mystics and prophets who can say to the king, yeah, you think it's, just because you say it's good doesn't make it good. I'm in contact with a higher source of wisdom, like the archetypal good, Plato would say, or God's higher wisdom of what's goodness. And what you're doing with how you're treating those people is not so good from that higher perspective. And that permits the modern democratic revolutions, for example. But it also starts to differentiate the human self, who's made in the special image of God in a way compared with the rest of nature. There is a gradual disenchanting process that can take place in some of these great axial breakthrough religions that also leads to modernity. That's a big story. We won't get into it now, but just wanted to flag that. And then part 4, if we go to the next one, just if we then see where we are, like with the late modern worldview, where we're in the kind of post-Copernican, we're decentered in the cosmos, to post-Darwinian, we're no longer the divine crown of creation, special biological creation of God. We're even in the Freudian view, we're just, the ego is just a little epiphenomenon coming out of the id, and it's a radically decentered, disenchanted perspective. That's not the whole story. Now, very quick, two more figures, and then we'll move from these. So notice how, you can't help but see that late modern, or we could say deconstructive postmodern, et cetera. You can't help but regard that as a descent, and the modern is a descent from the axial in the sense of, it's a huge, this is the Michelangelo moment here, the Sistine Chapel, God touches Adam, and there's huge transmission, and the modern self is like introjecting the transcendent divine, the creative powers, the agency, the sovereignty, the world's opening up to it, and you've got, it's happening just on every level in the Renaissance, and going right up through the Enlightenment and Romanticism. All those things are in many ways flowing out of that. And one final mandala, next, the last one, it's because it's a bigger picture. So this just brings in the crucial archaic, you see between the primal and the axial, there's the archaic, the great, the emergence of the great civilizations like Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Aztecs, in China, in India. And that's where you get very hierarchical, very militarized, they're extremely dynamic, and the arts and mind and everything are developing quickly, and the powers are up are elevated now. The agency is centralized at the top and still kind of connected to to the divine. And then switching over to the medieval, you've taken in the axial, but you're still got the archaic kingdom, divine right of kings, the papal, the church is very hierarchical, but it's starting the differentiation. There's a lot more going on there, but the main reason, first of all, let's just say that notice Chris Jung is the great psychologist of the mandala. It played a huge role in his own healing. He said after all the fragmenting and challenges of his psychological condition, the emergence of mandalas in his own imagination and also in those of his patients at similar periods, they represented a centering, a recentering and a rebirth of an integration of the opposites, above and below, left, right, but with all the powerful symbolic ramifications of that. Now, Jung is in touch with all of these. Yes, it's true, he often distorts through a modern lens. We talk about that, the mortgages to the past, but he has some, in a way that very few in his era, he had resonance with and insights into every one of these. And just look at how like his different concepts would play out in different eras. Like synchronicities are only a problem in the modern. They're just, if you're in the primal worldview, synchronicities are like life. Everything's speaking to you. You're in constant what's going on. Everything's breathing together. Everything's full of signs and symbols that are communicating, and the human being is embedded in this linguistic and moral community that goes out into the ensouled land and everything else that's happening in the natural world that the tribe is not distinct from in any way. Plus the individual, that porous circle there, that's also the individual is porously in the tribe. It's a very tribal, it's a we more than an I. The I really only gradually, first the pharaoh and the king really get the sense of I-ness, and then the prophets and the philosophers who get their distinctive connection to the transcendent unity, and there's a new sense of I. But then with modernity, I, ego, cogito ergo sum, etc. And then you get to the postmodern, and everything's in question. But you've got a huge, new emerging capacity. Postmodern may not be the right word for that bottom one there. Let's just call it like the liminal condition that we are all in right now, that has a tremendous range of possibilities. It's a transformational crucible, and the possibilities of re-enchantment and reconnecting with the whole and integrating the whole are there, but so also is catastrophic destruction. And so I don't have time to bring like archetypes all play out differently in these, the Platonic archetypes in the axial or the astral power gods in the archaic, etc. But let's just go straight to my main point. Jung was, by way of summarizing almost everything that I said so far, Jung was constantly trying to get the modern mind to remember that there were many more things in heaven and earth that were dreamt of in modern philosophy and the modern consciousness. I mean, that was one basic thing. But what I now want to end with is the great paradox that we're facing today. How is it that in certain respects, this most brilliant species, Homo sapiens, this brilliant and often truly noble, if deeply flawed, shadowed civilization, Western civilization, and this most brilliant era, modernity, how have these produce the tremendous catastrophe that humanity and the earth are now undergoing. The collapse of the whole Cenozoic era. It's a global catastrophe that's reshaping the earth, the very earth that gave birth to us, that lives in us, lives in this species, this civilization, this era. What is it about the modern mind and modern self so intrinsic to who each of us is and to our entire civilization that has separated itself from the whole so unprecedentedly and now has begun to crash the global biosphere? I've tried to explore this great paradox in books and lectures, tracing our history much more adequately than this. But with so little time, let me just cut to the chase and look at our present moment. We all know, and more important, we all feel that we're going through a great descent in our time. It's a great unraveling, a great turning. There are many descriptors, but it's a descent on many, many levels that feels in some ways like a kind of cosmic initiatory descent into the underworld of the unknown. I mean, that, by the way, that's a huge, that's a solar journey. It's the heroic sun solar journey going, all the way down. And the sun doesn't just ascend. It doesn't just rise. It also descends. It also goes down. That's why Nietzsche kept saying, I call on all those who are brave enough, courageous enough to be downgoers, to descend like the great sun. And that's also what Jung did. Now, it's a descent on many levels, and it feels in some ways like a kind of cosmic initiatory descent into the underworld of the unknown. And here's the conditions and features I'm speaking of. A sense of groping in the darkness, of ignorance, of not knowing, of metaphysical confusion. And it's all connected with a pervasive sense of deep uncertainty about the future. That's an essential characteristic of an initiation. Obviously, it's what we're experiencing now. So also, a perception of encroaching danger, a deconstruction, a collapse, a dying of an old identity. But it's now on a collective human level, the identity crisis of modern man, and I'll include the masculine quite deliberately. Not that it's all men, but it's that man, capital M. It's like an archetypal force. It's a cultural complex. It's on a vast scale. It's had great potency, agency, and consequences. A great sense of decentering and dethroning, as we were talking about. A sense of spiritual disorientation, of moral atrophy. God, our time, every damn news story. A sense that one may be going insane, the way Jung felt, or that the world is going insane. A loss of sure grasp of what is real. The pervasive insincerity, inauthenticity, unfounded statements, fake news, propaganda, the collapse of consensus truth, the profound crisis of meaning, acute suffering, a deep sense of isolation, an overwhelming, and here's a big one, and an important one, an overwhelming encounter with the fundamental failings, the moral shadow of ourselves, of modernity, the pathologies of modernity, of rationalist utilitarianism, of extractive capitalism, of the shadow of Christianity, of so many religions right now, more visible than ever before, the shadow of Western civilization, of men, of wealth, etc., of the great blight of humanity itself on the earth. And finally, an encounter with mortality. Only now it's on a planetary scale. The encounter with death is crucial to the great initiation, the death rebirth mysteries, the great rites of passage. But this encounter with mortality is now planetary that we're facing. And the fact is that all of these distinctive conditions of our current historical and evolutionary moment are have an uncanny resemblance to initiatory rites of passage. Also to Jung's individuation journey, to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, to the dark night of the soul and spiritual crises, in near-death experiences, in what Stan Groff called the perinatal death rebirth transition sequence in the unconscious that comes up regularly in psychedelic, holotropic, sacred medicine ceremonies, spiritual emergencies. All of these seem to be playing out on the collective human level, except that instead of being separated out from the tribe for the initiatory ritual, separated from the mothers, being isolated through this intense process in the tribe, we modern Homo sapiens, largely through our own agency, find ourselves separated out from the entire community of being, from the entire ensouled cosmos, from the anima mundi itself. And of course, in this case, all of us, the elders and the young alike, are swept up in this tremendous global process. The elders aren't calmly standing in watch from the outside the initiatory drama as in a tribal context. We're all in it. And yet, our accumulated experiences that everyone in this room has been through, of initiatory thresholds and transformations and the blessings that we've received in these journeys that each of us has had in our lives, these can play a role now in how we participate in this collective drama of our time. What to do? One's to recognize the role of hope. It's not an optimistic assessment of a situation. It's a spiritual metaphysical act that seeds the future. Another is the role of heroic communities like this one, so crucial for holding a collective vision of the good, the higher good that radically differs from the mainstream society. It's also crucial for helping each other undergo the ordeals of transformation. But it is especially important to recognize that uncertainty is crucial to any initiatory process. You have to feel that everything is on the line. You have to feel that your whole identity is at stake. You can't have a pretend near-death experience like at a weekend workshop. Otherwise, the radical moral and experiential transformation cannot take place. The fundamental vision cannot be transformed. Clearly, we're in a kairos moment, as Jung famously said, the right moment for a metamorphosis of the gods, of the fundamental principles and symbols. I'm just going to finish off, and then I got to 11. Fewer Q&As, but somehow this is just happening. Let me quote Jung. This is near the end of his life, the famous statement, "A mood of universal destruction and renewal has set its mark on our age. This mood makes itself felt everywhere, politically, socially, philosophically. We are living in what the Greeks called the kairos, the right moment for a metamorphosis of the gods, of the fundamental principles and symbols. This peculiarity of our time, which is certainly not of our conscious choosing, is the expression of the unconscious human within us who is changing. Coming generations will have to take account of this momentous transformation if humanity is not to destroy itself and the Earth's beautifully interrelated, delicate biosphere through the might of its own technology and science. And immorality and acquisitive greed. And so much is at stake, and so much depends on the psychological constitution of the modern human. Does the individual know that he or she is the make-weight that tips the scales? That infinitesimal unit on whom a world depends. I believe this entire evolution seems to be dynamically impelling us towards this great kairos moment, this vast initiatory crisis. And it's as if the universe has painstakingly differentiated us and separated us, because we are the universe. Everything, we've got everything in us. And our consciousness is the Earth's consciousness in human form, and the cosmos's consciousness in human form. And it's on a journey, just as we are. And the universe has played a huge role in differentiating and separating us out of the whole. It's propelled our reflexivity, our capacity for moral discernment, for symbolic consciousness. It's propelled our autonomy, I believe, so as to bring forth a part of itself, a partner who can freely love the beauty and majesty of the whole. A sacred marriage. You can't have the sacred marriage without the differentiation. A hieros gamos. We don't really know what will be born. It's an unpredictable living process that's still unfolding under great pressures and great peril. But I believe in some deep way, it has the potential to integrate all of that history and the evolutionary drama that informs it and the archaeological layers within our depths to bring forth a greater synthesis. We shall see. Oh, I guess we're just going to do one question. Please. Do you need a mic?
I think the room will pick it up. Thanks,
She said it's going to, just talk and
the room
see.
will pick it up.
Okay.
Speak out this way too.
So I have a question about Carl Jung and Sri Aurobindo. I believe you went to India, went to meet Sri Aurobindo. And what is that connection? And CIIS is existing because a devotee of Sri Aurobindo came to the United States. So I'd just like to know a little bit about that history.
Well, the most crucial part of the history is Frederick Spiegelberg, who was a professor at Stanford, who studied with Jung and Aurobindo, also Paul Tillich and Heidegger and so forth. And he and Alan Watts, and at the invitation of Frederick Spiegelberg, sent a message to Sri Aurobindo, and Haridas Chowdhury came as his representative, and they taught that school that is the origin of this school, the San Francisco Academy or American Academy of Asian Studies. It was that in the 1950s that basically, that's what all the beats got their Eastern infusion from. Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac and Gary Snyder and so forth. It's where the Esalen, Dick Price and Mike Murphy, that's where they came in. They were both in Stanford, studied with Spiegelberg. Spiegelberg just said one word when Mike Murphy came in by accident to his course at the beginning of the semester, and right at a certain point, Spiegelberg said Brahman with such resonance that Michael Murphy's life changed, and he went to India, and then later he and Dick Price got the idea for Esalen. It came out of, in the 1950s, came out of that matrix, and then that led in 1968 to this school. So many ways in which, so that's the concrete way it happened. I mean, when I first came to start teaching here, Spiegelberg invited me to come up and meet him, an elderly, quite old elderly man in, blanket and chair and keeping warm. And he'd read Passion of the Western Mind, and I felt it was very meaningful. But that's the concrete way it happened. But of course, Jung and Aurobindo remain two of the central, spiritual mentors of the school. And they bestowed a vision that I'm very proud of this school, this community for the last 50 more years has been playing a much bigger role than even the world realizes. And we don't have to always be recognized, even though it actually is recognized quite a bit. But you don't have to be famous. I mean, a lot of advantages in not being a celebrity or famous and always in the limelight. But we're rippling out, and so anyway, that Aurobindo and Jung connection is huge, and of course there's many other huge teachers that have informed the treasure house that CIIS represents, East-West Psychology, that is the a co-sponsor of this organization. Our philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness program in particular as well have been carrying this. But I've overcome my time, and I really appreciate being invited to be with you, and hope you have a great conference.